Welcome back to the Daily Mastermind. George Wright III with your daily dose of inspiration, motivation, and education. If this is the first time listening, you're in for a treat because we've got a great interview today. I've found an individual I feel is going to bring some real value to you, and I'm gonna set him up here because I want to give you a little bit of his background. I feel like the reason that we talk business so much is because we want you to be able to have a vehicle to be able to move forward in your life, but there's so many other aspects, right? Mind, body, money, business. And this gentleman here has been around. He's got a lot of experience. In fact, Bill Flynn's his name, and I'm gonna introduce him here in a second. But I'm gonna give you some of his background. He's been all kinds of different things when it comes to business with success. VP of sales 8 different times. He's twice a CMO. He's even been a GM of a division of $100 million IT services company. But he's had success after success, 2 IPOs, 7 acquisitions, including a turnaround during that 2008 financial crisis that I've actually mentioned a couple times on the show. But he's got a best-selling book, and he's just an overall very successful guy, father, entrepreneur, speaker, writer. And so I'm really super glad to have you on the show today. Everybody, I want you to welcome Bill Flynn. Hey, it's good having you on the show today.
Hey, great to be here, George. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we mentioned it before the show, but like both of us are pretty busy guys. And so it's tough to align the planets, but we did. And I'm super excited to have you here. And another thing I mentioned before the show is there's so many topics that you're great at and that you understand and that I'd love to hit. But I really loved how, I'm just going to tell you from my own personal experience with you, I love how you set it up. When I said, what's your real passion? What do you focus on the most? And you said, helping to prevent or solve preventable problems. What did you mean by that? And open up this conversation today by giving our audience a little bit about what you mean when you say preventable problems, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs and owners here listening to the show.
Yeah, sure. So I believe, and what I've found over really researching business over the last 30 years and really intensely in the last 5 to 8 years is that there's a gap between what science knows and what business does. I've done workshops with thousands of CEOs. I was a speaker for Vistage and EO, IPO and all these places. And I generally do the same kind of thing, and it's very interactive. And I do this sort of mini experiment where I ask questions, and I ask the same questions over and over again. And one of them is, what is strategy? And then I ask everyone to write down their answer, and everyone gets to say what their answer was. And most of the time the answer is not a strategy. Or the definition isn't really strategy. I hear it's a plan or it's a roadmap, it's whatever. And I try to get them to understand that strategy is the thinking that informs your plan. The best strategists, or the first strategists that we model most of this on, which is strategy is a military term, is this guy Hannibal. And many people don't know who Hannibal is, but Hannibal was really the first really great strategist, at least that we know about. And he defeated the Roman army on a regular basis with fewer resources, lesser trained, etc., because he had a strategy. And his strategy was basically, I turned into what I call the 4S strategy, which was stun, surprise, surround, and slaughter.
Mm.
And that's how he
No prisoners.
No prisoners, right? But he applied that. It depended on the time of year, the time of day, the opponent, where the geography, the topography was on. He thought ahead and said, how am I going to do this? But he applied the same rules. And that's what great businesses do, right? They understand the simplicity of what they need to do to be successful. The most successful public company over the last 50 to 60 years is Southwest. And Southwest Airlines has a very simple strategy, which is summed up as wheels up.
Mm.
And supposedly, if you walk around anywhere in Southwest and ask anyone, from the guys on the tarmac to the people checking you in to the offices, they all know what the strategy is. And the strategy is get the plane in the air. How can we get the plane in the air as fast as possible? Everything they do is around getting it in the air, right? There's also, they have a great experience and all of this
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
But it's really about that. And they know that they make money when they get planes in the air.
I tell you, I didn't expect really just that like little topic to resonate so much with me on strategy, and it's funny because I deal with high net worth, high end CEOs all the time. And you're right. I think a lot of times we think of strategy as a thing, a plan, a roadmap, and strategy in the sense of a verb and a way of thinking and things is key. And you're right. I've seen the most successful businesses, CEOs, experts have been individuals that think a certain way. And so you originally said like the tie in that neuroscience or what science knows with what business does. Is this what you mean? Because you say strategy, but are you saying also there's ways to think that are a little bit differently? I really like where you're going with that.
Yeah. When you think about strategy, if you think of it as execution, then you're thinking differently than a sort of a heuristic that you can use as you think about execution. It should fit into the strategy. Is this thing that we're talking about that we think is really important, does it resonate and does it conform to our overall strategy? Does it get us closer to our vision?
Yeah.
What is success to us? What does that mean to us? And if you don't have those sort of beacons to guide you, then you'll start to do stuff that maybe eventually 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you regret that you did.
Mm,
But it seemed like a great idea at the time. But if you don't have these simple beacons to guide you, and because you've done the work up front, right? You look at great leaders like Alan Mulally of Ford, Bob Chapman of
yeah.
Barry Wilkes, um, Steve Jobs, etc. They were they thought in very simple but elegant terms, right? What are we really trying to accomplish here? What business are we truly in? And then make sure that the team, that's all the job is, to make sure the team is are we getting there? Is that what we're doing? Is that the right thing? So that's what I think, and that's what the science of management science has been around for 100 years, right? Talking Drucker, Deming, Shine, McGregor, Porter, Edmondson, etc., thought leaders of the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And they've been saying this since then, but we just don't do it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel right. It doesn't make us feel good in the short term because it takes a while.
Yeah.
It-
It's also, I think, all of those key components that you've talked about that I talk about on this show of your vision, strategy, decision making, your planning, all those processes, we think very specifically in the vein of business. And so I really like how you talk about what science actually knows and what we actually do are different. But I think that what I try to do with this podcast is I try to get people to just think differently, because what they don't realize, if they stopped and just looked, they would see it, is that successful people that execute, people that get results, people that are happier, more fulfilled, they think differently. And I think there is a gap. And why do you think that is though? Why do you think that there's such a gap between what we do in business and what really how we think? What is the reason for that gap? Is it cultural? Is it like just the marketplace? What is it?
yeah. So I think there are two things that we talked a little about this before the show is our brain is constantly working against us, right? It's designed to do something completely different than we're asking to do it today, right? Our brain has not had a major upgrade in the last 10 to 50,000 years.
Mm.
And even 10,000 years ago, we were not as we are today, right? We were in tribes of 150 or so. We were having to survive in a very hostile environment. So our brain was designed, the one that's eventually that we ended up with was the one of the survivors. And the survivors, to be honest with you, ran away from everything. They just didn't put themselves in the situation to be eaten or to fall off a cliff or whatever happened. So our brain has two things that I think fall out of that. One is, I would say, conventional wisdom. There's a lot of conventional wisdom in business, and it's not good, right? Conventional wisdom
Yeah.
is not usually the thing that gets you there.
Yeah.
And then there's also there are supposedly about 150 unconscious biases that our brain has that are working with us. I think and conventional wisdom is the impact of those things, right? So I think the underlying thing is these unconscious biases around a number of things that we do. Negativity bias is probably the biggest one. We remember the negative and try to stay away from the negative 2 times more often than the
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah.
If you want to grow your business and you've grown a whole bunch of them, you have to take some risks. But your brain is saying, no, don't do that. That's wrong. Don't take the risk. Stay with the status quo. It's much easier. It's much safer. And it's doing outside of your conscious awareness. And you make up the reasons after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think those are the things that are really, from a scientific perspective, are really fundamental to success. And great thinkers, great leaders, people who have succeeded, they ignore that. They work hard to not have that be their driving
Yeah.
force.
They consciously can create the direction, right? I talk a lot about the fact that people don't realize that just because they're not actively training their brain and helping to shape this tool that they have, they think it's not working against them, but it's working against you regardless because of the, inherent hardwired nature of, genetics or conventional wisdom or whatever. But on top of that, you've got all these beliefs and experiences that you've had in your life. I'm an entrepreneur. I've gone through certain scenarios a million times. And whether you consciously think it or not, your experiences and beliefs are going to pop back in regardless. And so if you're not consciously directing or ignoring or reshaping your thoughts and using your brain to your advantage, it is working against you. And so I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that also speaks to what you said earlier, which is, they're preventable problems because most of us are not consciously aware that those things are happening. But if we could be more aware, then they are preventable. So what do you feel like, what are some of the ways that people can take control and start shaping their thoughts and their brain and their mind when it comes to business?
Yes, as I said earlier, I've been studying this for more than a decade. So I am very aware that these things are there. Yet fall, I still fall prey
Every
to this.
day. Yeah.
It's unconscious, right? You don't
Yeah.
know. So what you have to do, there's this guy, Daniel Kahneman, who's a behaviorist. When he's actually won a Nobel Prize in economics for some of his stuff.
Mm.
And he's written a book. He's written lots of books. One of them called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, which I think is one of the things that you have to do as a leader is you have to slow down, right? What I say to my leaders is when you're at your best, when you're extremely curious, you should stay as curious as long as you can as a leader, right? If someone comes to you and says, I want to do this, or they disagree with you, don't try to win the argument, right? Your job is to say, tell me more about that. You think completely differently than I do. How did you come to that thinking, etc.? And that slows down your thinking, right? This whole thing, count to 10, is actually very true. If you just react, your brain is going to react to situations automatically.
Yeah.
Supposedly 90 some odd percent of our reactions are just automatic.
Yeah.
Yet
Is
we
it
think,
counterintuitive though? Do as a leader, you're almost expected to have decisions and direction and be automatic. And it is a little counterintuitive to say, no, slow down and be curious. Because I have been around some leaders that are very curious. They want to learn and grow, but they're also very decisive.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be that when you're just automatically doing it. But it seems to be a little counterintuitive to most conventional
totally.
wisdom for leadership, right?
Just imagine you're at least in the West, right? And we both grew up in the United States, I'm assuming, and the education system does not foster that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The ones who are rewarded are the ones who have the answer,
Yeah.
and the ones who have the answer fast are the ones that
Yeah.
are rewarded the most, right? Coming up with the answer, you're being rewarded for doing that. So,
Mm.
and a lot of those people become leaders, and that's what they think, right? I read a lot of books about leaders, and I read the latest one was from Hubert Joly, who ran Best Buy a number of years ago and really turned them around. And he was at McKinsey early on, and he said, "Look, everything I was taught of how to be a leader, etc., was basically wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
That when I became much more compassionate and thoughtful of the people and taking care of my folks and being curious and being part of their lives and understanding all of that, I became a much better leader. And guess
Mm.
what? My business also became much better." Right?
It's crazy because you hit it right on the head. Curiosity and thoughtfulness doesn't mean indecision,
No.
and it in any way. But it also happens to be not only a good strategy, but it empowers leaders to enable their team because people want to know you're listening to them. Even if, look, I've been around some leaders that they want to hear what you have to say. They're very decisive in their leadership capability, and so I think it will help build your team as well if you can be curious and thoughtful, and it doesn't mean being indecisive. Yeah?
Exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. There's a great book called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette, who was a
Yeah,
captain.
I read it. Yeah.
And he had to turn into this leader that we're talking about. He had no choice because he didn't have the answer. He was studying one submarine for a year, and then he got assigned a completely different one. And he had 2 weeks. And what am I supposed to do? I'm going to kill these people if I tell them to do stuff and I don't really know what I'm doing. But
Yeah.
I think he said one point, he said 2/3 ahead. And the guy at the switch said, didn't do anything. And he said 2/3 ahead. And the guy didn't do anything. He said, "What are you doing over there?" He said, "Captain, we don't have 2/3.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Right.
And you know what, though? A lot of leaders do that. A lot of leaders feel like I got to go in and especially new leaders, right? I got to go in and I got to be the guy. I got to be the gal. I've got to be able to be decisive and all these things. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be an effective leader that way because
Right.
conventional wisdom is not necessarily going to help you get results. And so I think you're a hundred.
Not over the long term though. Short term,
Yeah,
that often works, right? But over the long term, it doesn't because then you disempower your people, right? And they're just waiting for you to tell them what to do. And if you can get 1,000 people and having their brains helping you, now you got to set the standards, right? You got to set the vision for the business, right? And here's our strategy. And these are the 2 or 3 most important things that we're thinking about. But if you teach them that and then drive that decision making down to them, give them the opportunity to do that, that's so much more powerful than yourself or
I
even your
love
team.
that. I want to put an emphasis on something you just said though, because I think what a lot of people don't realize because they just combine it all together is that you do need to set a very clear vision
Yeah.
and idea of where you want to go, but then you can take a step back and you can be curious and thoughtful and still decisive while you're taking people in that direction. But you're going to have a whole lot more help on your team if you are that way. And yet you'll still inspire your team because you've set a vision of where you want to go. You don't have to have all the direction figured out. In fact, empowering your team to help you get there is going to be a key part, right? So talk to me because you're a big component, you're a big fan, and you're a big promoter of team, right? Help me understand how you view teams as a strategy and a way for people to become successful and lead an organization overall.
Yeah. So there's some research out there, we talk about science, is that most people are on at least one team in a business. Some of those are on 2 or more.
Hmm.
And many of those teams aren't actually on the org chart. And if you look at a business, especially what I do with my clients is we talk about what are the key functions that run the business. There's usually between 8 and 12 key functions. And you're talking head of company, sales, marketing, operations, finance, IT, whatever.
Yeah.
You need these things to really make the company run. And then I say, okay, what are the key components that drive the business model? What are when you follow the money from the beginning of spending it to
Yeah.
getting it
Yeah.
back? There's usually 4 to 6. It's typically marketing, sales, operations, and finance are usually in that mix somehow.
Right.
And they are all, and I said, draw the line how those things are connected, right? Marketing feeds sales, feeds operations. It also can feed finance, right? And other stuff as well. And understanding how those teams function within that context and then within their own world is not something we take a lot of time to think about. And I say, let's break marketing down, right? Marketing down, if you're going to, most of marketing, I ran marketing a couple times and I was also a sales guy, catching what they got. And their main job, in my opinion, is to drive qualified leads to the sales process,
Right.
whatever way they can. They can decide on what the best way to do that is, right? Because they're doing the work, etc. But first of all, marketing is just, to me, just making sales easier. If you think of marketing just as a function,
Mm,
not as a team or department, it's just making sales easier.
yeah.
And how do you do that? Yes, you can do demand generation and do lots of advertising, etc. But that's the middle of the problem, right? If you haven't looked at the a problem worth solving
Yeah.
and creating a product or a set of solutions that solve it in a way that your main customer really cares about, then selling is a lot harder. You
Yeah.
haven't done any demand generation yet. So understanding just how marketing works and say, what are those key sub functions underneath? So you might say it's product marketing, product management, development, and demand generation. Those are the key 4 underneath, right? And those are completely different kinds of brains, right? Someone who's really good at product marketing is really
Right.
curious and asking questions and has a broad context of things. And then he or she hands it over to the product management team and they say, make some spec that does this. Go find out what it is. And if it's software, it's what are the modules you need, et cetera. And then hand it over to the development team and they're going to code the thing, et cetera. And then also tell the marketing people who do demand generation, here's your key core customer. Here's what they care about. Here are their struggles. Here's how we solve their problem. Right now, go make marketing stuff that goes to that, does that. Those are like 3 or 4 different people, very different people that have to work together in an environment. And as a leader, your job is to assemble those people in the greatest way you can, give them those standards, and then get out of their way.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
I think you hit it right on the head when you said conventional wisdom. Most individuals, they look at their org chart and they see marketing, sales, operations. They don't ever really truly identify, number one, the fact that people within those separate departments are part of teams and how they flow and how they function together and what they do is the key to making things happen faster and more effectively. And so I think that having that synergy and look, if you're a high net worth individual in business or even just a CEO, C-level manager leader, you've been on teams with other individuals and they all think differently. People that go into operations think totally different than people that go into marketing. And when you operate in a silo, I've had this happen many times where marketers don't think through, they just get the leads there. And sales guys are like, man, what, you didn't set this up for us to make it simple or easy and it's difficult. Or sales guys make sales for the company and the operations people are like, man, we got to pick up all the pieces. We're trying to figure this out. To have those things work cohesively together requires getting out of the box a little, thinking a little bit different. And I think that there isn't a lot of leadership training when it comes to that. There's leadership training to do your job better, but not to work with a team better. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. There's a lot of, I have a lot of, I'm in this thing with Marshall Goldsmith and 100 coaches, and a lot of executive coaches, and they do a lot of sort of leadership development,
Hmm.
team building, et cetera, which I think is important, but it also, they don't often pull back enough and say, okay, but what's the purpose of what we're doing here? Right. And how do these teams of teams fit together for the whole, right? You're overall trying to get to the vision. You're trying to be
Yeah.
successful. Then you break it down into smaller components. But we don't do that. We don't understand. We assemble groups of people, but don't know how to create teams of people.
I
And
agree. I
um,
agree. I actually think a common quality of really successful people that I've met over time goes back to something you said, and I'm just going to reemphasize it, being thoughtful and curious. Because when you just go through the process because of your experience, your company or whatever, and you're trying to be, so look, where everybody's striving. But when you can take a step back, like you said, and be thoughtful and curious, sometimes the process that you have is not even working. Sometimes it's not even the right process in the first place. And you can only be reinventing your business or being more successful if you take a step back and do that. I'm curious because, and man, I have so many topics I want to talk to you about. I might have to bring you back to our academy group because I want to talk about this idea that really hit me as you were talking. And it may or may not lead to your book because you've got a book called Further Faster. And I think that's everybody's goal, right? I want to go
yeah,
further faster. But
yeah,
I'm assuming, and I haven't read your book yet, but I promise I will, and I plan to, especially after our conversation. Further faster. My gut tells me you're gonna have some frameworks or some ideas and strategies that relate to this idea and this connection between science and actual application in business. So talk to me about your book, because if everybody's goal is to go further faster, and the goal here now is for us to be more thoughtful and curious, what are some practical steps and things they can do to move forward? These might be in your book, they might not be, but
yeah, sure. So I'm going to harken back since we talked a lot about mindset. Is to me there are two things that you need to have in terms of mindset. One is curiosity, and the other is compassion. And what I
yeah,
mean by my definition of compassion is empathy with action. Right?
okay,
Making
yeah.
sure that you try to understand the other person's perspective, be it your customer, your team member that's you're on your team with, whomever, and then have a bias for action. I think if you
I
have
like what
those,
you just said. You said bias for action. Because I
yeah,
think you're right. People think of compassion and they're like, I'm compassionate. This isn't about just being empathetic. You're saying empathetic with a bias for taking action. Yes?
yeah, understanding, taking the information. Okay, so for what I heard, let's try this,
Mm.
and then go ahead and move with that. But so those are two things I think. If there were two things on mindset, those are two. If you look at great leaders, they are really good at those two things that build businesses over long periods of time.
So,
So
Bill,
yeah,
let me just make one comment because
yeah,
I want you to finish your thought. It really resonated with me. I think those two things actually go really well together because having curiosity almost empowers you with a sense of compassion automatically. If you're trying to be curious about the customer, curious about the process, curious about the person you're on a team with, but you have a bias for action, that curiosity brings compassion with it, I think, and then allows you to take action. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I
They are
love it. Okay,
definitely
cool. Sorry, I didn't
interconnected.
mean to interrupt, but I wanted to really double
No,
down.
yeah. Yeah, there's a little overlap in those two things,
I
but I
love
think
it.
those two things are really important. So yeah, so I wrote a book because, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's a shame that a lot of really good ideas, really good people, and really good businesses fail or struggle for completely preventable reasons. And what I did is I took my 30 years of study of and experience and said, what are those things that really are the ones that come up most often that when people focus on these things, they're successful?
Mm,
And I try to be a first principle thinker. And one first principle is called the Pareto principle or the
I love it. I love that.
societal view or the 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That means that 80% of the results happen because of 20% of the action. So I don't know if it's 20%, but that's what I put in my book is what do you really need to understand And there are three things that you need to understand well and do well as a leader. And that's understand that performance is a team sport.
Mm,
So really understanding how to attract, craft, and grow teams and teams of teams is essential.
mm,
The other is you need to understand that your business is just one big system and it's made up of a bunch of subsystems and components.
mm,
Understand what those subsystems are. A lot of the subsystems are around people. Culture is a subsystem. Having a cohesive leadership team is a subsystem. How to hire really great A players and grow A players is another system. Knowing how to do those things is what you need. And then strategy and execution are really key systems inside that sort of people bubble. And then lastly, if you really want to understand how to grow a business over time, your primary financial metric should be cash,
mm.
not revenue,
Yeah,
not profit,
I agree. 100% I agree. Yeah.
right? Because you got to invest in front of your business and you need money to do that. So when I work with my clients, we say, oh, the next 3 years or so, we want to do this. I say, okay, how much is that going to cost you? How many people do you need to hire? How many systems you need to put in place? How many factories you need to build? Okay, now let's build the plan to generate the cash you need to do that. Most people do the financial first,
Yeah.
and it's backwards.
Yeah. No, and I like how you refined that because I agree with you entirely. In fact, I think cash and cash flow are very important things in a business. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like, because I love this concept you have of your book and the lessons you've learned and the things that you're making available. What do you find are, this is a little bit of a digression, but what do you find are maybe the most common mistakes or mistake that you feel like someone makes when it comes to cash? We're talking about having it as a priority, but what's the biggest common mistake you're finding from people that you're working with?
That they don't understand the difference between operating cash and cash flow.
Ah, I like
So,
that.
so there's two things that are important for cash. Cash is fuel and cash is safety.
Yeah.
So we're now in 2024.
Yep.
We've had three existential financial crises so far,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
9/11, 2008, COVID.
20. Yep.
Happens every 6 to 8 years. Just look back over the last 40, 50 years. We have one every 6 to 8 years. The
Wow.
ones that thrive have money to survive those things. So that's the safety. The other is fuel, right? Cash is fuel. If you want to grow your business, you hire people generally when you need them, but but they don't start producing until months after, or you have to build a factory or buy a software system or whatever it is. You have to do it in front of it. So it's the fuel that drives your business. So knowing how to spend your money is crucial. And that fits into that overarching, what's your vision? What's your strategy? What problem are we solving for our customer? What job are they hiring us to do? How are we uniquely different from our rivals? Those are all those beacons that I talked about. When you put those things in place, the decisions that you have to make on a regular basis are easier. And guess what? You make fewer and fewer of them because
Yeah.
you're constantly pushing the day-to-day decisions down to your people who are closer to the information. But we
Yeah.
can't command and control anymore. Things move too fast and we're too disparate, especially now we got remote work. But there's just so many things that are working against this command and control thing. You have to have the courage to push all the day-to-day stuff away from your desk. Right? I
Yeah.
say that to leaders all the time. Your first job is to fire yourself from the day-to-day. The only way you can do all your other jobs that are important with vision and strategy is you need to create time and space to relax your brain to be creative and innovative. Your best ideas are
Yeah.
not when you're doing, it's when you're not doing, right? You're running or in the shower, whatever.
Yeah. And the key is learning how to run this organization. It's funny. It reminds me of a book I read a while back called The Birth of the Chaotic Age by D. Hawk, who was the founder of Emeritus, right? Of Visa. And you ask people the question now, where's Visa located? They're like, I don't really know. Like, it's because I don't even know what it is now, trillions of dollars business, but it's because it's made up of member organizations. And the whole concept behind the book is how to create chaos, how to organize chaos, and know that you can't control chaos. You just have to set a system in place for it
Yeah.
to grow and flourish with its independent parts. And I think a business is a living, breathing organization like that. So not only do you have to step
Yeah.
back and be curious and thoughtful and innovative and have that creativity, but you have to understand the parts of your business and put things in place to foster the collaboration and the growth in the teams And so I like how you've pulled this all together, but yet still gave us something tangible. I really love your thoughts on cash being a real metric. So I know we're out of time, but I wanted to ask you, Bill, where's the best place? And then I'm gonna put a bunch of links in our show notes here that people can connect with you, because I think there's a lot of topics that really would be beneficial for a lot of the business owners and things that I have. Where's the best place for them to contact you? And then you mentioned that you've got a gift for people on our show as well, as far as your book. So could you give some information on that?
Sure. All my stuff is on my website. It's called catalystgrowthadvisors.com. My book is on there and you can download it for free if you'd like. You can also go to Amazon and Audible if you want to have me make a few bucks. That's great. But I didn't write it to make money. I wrote it to help people. It is a do-it-yourself book. It has about 10 to 20 exercises that go with the book. And you go to my website and you can download, and hopefully I wrote them in a way that you can do it yourself. It's not the be all and end all of, if you just read my book and you'll get everything right. But it's those core things that I think really drive most businesses, that 80-20 rule. And all my other stuff is on there. Contact information. I do write a blog post every other week, very actionable, very short as well. So you can get on my newsletter and get those a couple times a month as well.
That's awesome. Guys, listen to what he just said there. And I want to stop you and pause you if you're just running on the treadmill or driving to work or whatever it is. Bill's advised and worked with hundreds of companies. And he's been there, done that, just like myself. And he's got some wisdom, and he is literally giving you this download. He's not charging you for it. It's not a marketing funnel. I asked him about that earlier. I go, where's the marketing funnel? Because I'm a marketer, right? He's giving you this download of wisdom. And so I highly encourage you to go over there and check it out. We're most likely, we're going to have this as part of our Academy membership group, and we'll cover this again on the podcast, I'm sure. But go to Catalyst Growth Advisors, download the book, and give me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you what feedback we have. And listen, you are going to be the average of people you hang out with. You're getting information from us today, but I want you guys to do me a favor and share this show. And look, I really believe that no matter how much experience people have, no matter what they've done in business, their experience, their background, their thoughts, their beliefs, whatever, it's never too late to start creating the life that you're meant to live, or the business you want to grow, or make changes in your organization. But you've got to make decisions, and you've got to take action, and you've got to learn from individuals like Bill's doing in this book. So Bill, I really appreciate you spending time with us here today, man. I know we're going to have some ongoing conversations, but I appreciate you being here. Is there any other final thoughts you want to leave with the audience here before we take off?
There is one, which is, and I like action as well. So to me, of all the things I said, we touched on a little bit, but if you want to be a really great leader, your job is to create followers. That's really what all leaders do. They create followers. We can say they have all these attributes, but really great leaders create followers. The best way to create a follower is to write a compelling vision. So highly recommend that. You probably have this thing in your head, write it down, share it with everyone in your company, share it with the new people that you want to hire, and say, this is what we're doing. Are you on board for this? I highly recommend. There's a book called Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold, which is a great little recipe book for that.
Wait, say that again. What's the title?
Vivid Vision.
Okay.
Which is, I love it. He just tells you how to do it, like where to sit and how to do it and whatever. And he gives examples, etc. That's what your people want. They want to know, where are we going? So tell them.
I love that. That is great. And that's a great inspirational thought to end on as well. In fact, I'm going to personally I haven't read that book, and I've read a lot of books, but I think that's one I'm going to pick up. So thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. And listen, thanks guys for tuning in. We really appreciate your support in the show. And if there's anything I can do for you, hit me up on the Daily Mastermind on Instagram, Facebook, or you can email me as always. And I look forward to talking with you more. Once again, this has been the Daily Mastermind. Have a phenomenal day. Talk to you tomorrow.